Creator helped me tell this story in the way that it needs to be told. So I wanted to tell you how my sister died. So my sister had a small stroke, a mini stroke, and she didn't know what was going on at the time. She was with her honey. She trusted me, so she asked me to call her an ambulance because I had a phone and she didn't at the time, so I did. The ambulance came. The ambulance workers went up to her, they looked at her, but when they came in, they talked to me quickly first, and they asked me how I knew this person, and I said that was my sister. And they said, well, what's her birthday? And I said, I didn't know. And I said, I grew up in the 60s group. I didn't know her like that. I didn't know her till late in life. And the guy got suspicious. And what he did was he made some phone calls to the police, to the fire department. More people came. While they were tending to my sister, the cops came. They asked me to come into the police car. And while this was going on, the fire department team, which was a chief and two of his workers, entered my house and started searching. They were searching for fentanyl. So my sister, who had a mini stroke, was prepared, put into the ambulance, and then went off to the hospital. She didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. And it took me a while in the police car to understand why I was being interviewed in a police car when my sister was sick. And I didn't know what was wrong with my sister. And that's when the police officer told me that they thought it might be fentanyl, that they were looking into that, and that's why they were questioning me. So, and I just realized that they thought I was a drug dealer. And the shock of this was really upsetting. It was really made me furious. And then I realized what the fire department and his team were doing in my house. So the police officer was fine after I told him why I didn't know. He recognized that what the 60s scoop was, and he realized that my sister and I only knew each other recently. And he had no reason to believe I was a fentanyl dealer, so he let me go. I went to my house, and I asked the fire chief what he was doing. And the fire chief says, I am looking to make sure your place is secure, sir. He says, I'm looking for any violations of the fire code, and we found some. Let me take you to that. And then he takes me into my house, and he takes me to the fire alarm. So he told me that I had until midnight to replace this fire alarm, or they would send a bill to my landlord for a fine of something like $2,000. And I had to address this immediately because it was a fire code violation. Meanwhile, my sister is sick, and I don't know what's going on with my sister, but she's gone to the hospital, and I know I have to go pick her up, but then I have to take care of this. So I head off to Rona. I pick up a new fire alarm, I come back home, and I install it. This all takes maybe an hour or so, and then he comes in and says, well, I need to test it and make sure it works. And he comes in and he tests it, and he sets it off and resets it, and he verifies that I did this. The whole time these team are looking at me like I'm a criminal, right? Like I'm a drug dealer, like I'm dealing fentanyl, and I'm the one that got this person sick, and they're looking at me like with a sort of disgust. So then I go to the hospital. I drive in because I've taken care of my house, and I go and see where my sister is, and she's there in the hospital bed, and she's still scared, but she's relieved to see me come in. And the nurse comes in. The nurse looks at me with a dirty look, and she says, well, we couldn't find any fentanyl, but your sister is safe to go home. This happened 3 times. 3 times we called the ambulance. And 3 times they accused us of fentanyl overdose, but they could not find any traces of it. So I went on a business trip. I had to go away for work for 3 days. And I came back, and my nephew came up to me. And he says, I think there's something wrong with Auntie. And I asked him what happened. He says they were in a bus shelter, and he said she collapsed. He says, she needs to go to the hospital. Can you take her? And I had this feeling inside that there was something really wrong. So I went to the bedroom to talk to her. Half of her face was drooping down. And I knew what it was. She had a stroke. And she told me that she didn't want to call the ambulance. That she was waiting for me to come home. Because she didn't trust them anymore. I asked her how long. So it was like 27 hours since she had her stroke. And I'm sure if you're a medical professional, you'll know that was too long. So I told her I had to call the ambulance. And she begged me not to call the ambulance. She said that she needed me to take her. She wanted to go to the hospital with me. I called the ambulance. They were coming. We could hear the sirens. And she told me that she would never forgive me. That she didn't want to go with them. Do you hear that? She didn't trust them anymore. So the ambulance came. They came up to me and they asked me what was going on. And I said my sister had a stroke. It looks like she has a stroke. Her face is drooping. And they said, well, do you know how long it's been? And I said, well, I believe it's been 27 hours. I said, I just got back from my business trip. And they just looked at me with just disgust. Like, are you stupid? Don't you know you're supposed to call an ambulance? They just gave me this look like it was my fault. It was their fault. I had taken her to the hospital 3 times, and they weren't able to discover what was wrong with her because they were more concerned about fentanyl because of what they thought about us. They thought the worst of us. And they didn't treat her for what was wrong with her. This was blatant discrimination. This resulted in my sister's condition, which led to her death the following year.